Hello, welcome to the show. Now, in light of the Christmas season, I thought it'd be an interesting idea to do a little video about what every team is wishing for this Christmas for the 2022 season. We're going to go through each team. Won't spend a lot of time on each team, but just to get the general gist of, what fans are hoping for and what I think the club in general is looking for in terms of outcomes for next season. So without further ado, let's not waste any more time and jump right in. We're going to start with the Crows, and for the Crows, I think that their wish will be that Riley Thilthorpe makes the jump. Obviously, that's a tough surname to pronounce, bit of a tongue twister, but the Crows have been really crying out for a bit of a proper good key forward. In the last couple of years, they've tried Billy Frampton up there when he was there. They've tried Elliot Himmelberg when he was up there. Darcy Fogarty hasn't really lived up to expectations. So Riley Thilthorpe, I think in his first game, he kicked 5 goals. So that was a glimpse towards the future. But they're going to probably be hoping he can make a big jump. The Crows, there was a bit of an issue with their scoring output last season. So I think that if Riley Thilthorpe can make the jump, it's going to be pretty huge in helping the Crows to make a jump and probably achieve a little bit more success a bit higher up the ladder. So I think that's going to be really key for the Crows, and I think that's what fans will be wishing for them next year. For Brisbane, it's going to be that they get past the second week of the finals. The last 3 seasons, I think they've made the finals, fairly high up. I think all 3 times it's been in the top 4, but it's like being a little bogey thing for them. They lost to GWS a couple seasons ago. I'm trying to think who else they lost to. Obviously, they lost to the Bulldogs in pretty devastating fashion last season. But obviously, they're going to be hoping that this time around there'll be a bit of a change of fortune, because obviously it's been a bit of a curse for them. With the team they've got, they should be progressing a bit further in September, and I think that's what fans and the club will be hoping for season 22. For Carlton fans and for the club, they're going to be wishing that McGovern and Zach Williams live up to their contracts finally. They've had some pretty rough starts, obviously, to their careers at Carlton. Obviously, Zach Williams, switching between a wing position, an inside midfield position, and a half-back position. Obviously, they need to find the right place to put him. And obviously, Mitch McGovern, he is a swingman, basically. He has played back and he has played forward, but it's about finding the balance. I think there's an opportunity for him to cement a role in the best 22 as a replacement for Liam Jones. Obviously, that position is vacant. There are a few other contenders, but if there's any opportunity for McGovern to finally perform and live up to that contract, it's going to be this season, I reckon. And Zach Williams, obviously, if these two can get going, really help the Blues in at least making the top 8 and then possibly putting in a good run in September. So it's going to be interesting to see, but I know as a Carlton fan myself, I really want to see these guys perform because, they've shown their potential in the past. I think it's about time they finally show it at our football club. For Collingwood, it's going to be that Nick Dacos replicates his NAB League season form. And obviously this guy went nuclear. 2 goals and 36 touches, I believe, per game, which is absolutely absurd, by the way, for a midfielder. Obviously, he's not a tall midfielder either. So obviously it may take a little bit more time for him to find his footing. Bigger midfielders obviously going to be a bit more accustomed to, the bigger bodies in the AFL. But in saying that, if there's one player in the draft class that can probably, replicate their own form in the NAB League, it's probably going to be Nick Dacos, and I think a lot of fans will be wishing for it. Obviously, the son of Peter, so he's got a gift, and it's just going to be a matter of time when he actually finds that. But I think a lot of Collingwood fans will be hoping that season 2022 will be the year for that. For Essendon, I think they'll be wishing that Darcy Parish's season wasn't a fluke. It took, I think, about 4 or 5 weeks before some injuries happened, and I think it was Jai Caldwell that was probably the big one. Dylan Shield as well. There were a few others. It allowed Darcy Parish to go into the midfield. Had been outplayed in the wrong positions for a couple of years. They finally put him in his natural position and he went absolutely ballistic. polled highly in the Brownlow as well. So I think Essendon fans will be hoping that that wasn't a fluke, and I think it'll really contribute to, you know, Essendon achieving some better success in you know, the final series, because obviously they made the finals only just, but if Darcy Parish is able to perform again and Essendon avoid the injury bug, I think they can, you know, push for, you know, 5th, 6th, maybe 4th. That is probably the optimistic outlook, though. So, yeah, I think 5th or 6th could be a very achievable finish if, you know, all goes well for Essendon. Fremantle will be wishing that Jordan Clark becomes an A-grade midfielder, and obviously he was starved of opportunities at Geelong, deciding to play the older players over the young. Jordan Clark, I mean, when he did play with Geelong, there are a few very iffy moments which would make it difficult to justify his selection in the best 22, but Fremantle, they traded a bit of capital for him. Obviously, they did well to pick him up. They played a bit of hardball to get him in. So, you know, look, they lost Adam Chera. They're looking to fill the void, and obviously they brought Will Brodie in as well. Nat Fyfe obviously needs to stay healthy, but I think Jordan Clark has the potential. He has the tools. He got drafted higher in his draft year. It's just a matter of, you know, actually converting it to the AFL now, and getting a lot of continuity, which has been something he's been starved of in his first few years in the AFL. So I think Fremantle fans will be hoping that Jordan Clark can be the guy to fill the void that Adam Chera has left. I think Geelong fans are just hoping for the kids to get a run, because, you know, they've obviously prioritised experience over the youth, but it probably is time to flip a stone, basically, because they still haven't made a grand final. Well, they have made a grand final, but they haven't won a grand final with, you know, the high caliber players they've gotten in God knows how long. I think it's been 10 years now. So, look, you've got to find the right time to, as I said, flip a stone, start a new era. Because, yeah, if you keep playing these old guys, there's going to be a season where all the old guys leave, all the kids are getting exposed, and you're going to be 18th on the ladder instantly. So, I think for the best of the club, obviously this is very opinion-based, but I think that the kids need a bit more of a run for the Cats. Gold Coast fans are probably hoping for their best place finish in the club's history, and I know that's a very low bar in comparison to some other teams. But let's face it, the Suns, I don't think, have finished higher than 12th in their history. And obviously this is very optimistic to say that they'll finish higher than that. But I think Gold Coast fans, the few of them they got, they've probably grown impatient at this point. They've got a lot of young kids as well who have had a few years of exposure into the system. You know, we're talking Lukosius, Jack Bowes, Ben King's had a year or two in the league, Rankin, you know, the list goes on. They got Matt Rowell as well. Noah Anderson was good last year. It's just about putting it all together and being a very formidable side, which the Suns have failed to achieve because their good players keep leaving. So I think the goal for the Suns is at least to improve upon last season, because, yeah, they can't keep settling for these 15th, 16th, 17th place finishes, because it just makes for a mediocre football club. For GWS, I think they will be hoping that Toby Green doesn't get suspended at all next year. I think that is probably going to be a miracle, but, you know, that's what wishes are for, am I right? Obviously, Toby Green got rubbed out. He may be rubbed out at the start of the season as well for that hit in, the hit on the umpire, or the little brush. They got a few weeks. So, obviously, he's going to be out for the start of the season, but I think beyond that, they're going to be hoping that they can give him a full run at it, because I think injuries have been a little bit of a problem for him. So, obviously, it doesn't help if you're getting suspended and getting injured on top. So, they'll be hoping that Toby Green can avoid both of those, because he is absolutely vital to their success. And we saw in plenty of games this season how, you know, Toby Green was basically carrying that team on their back. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see, but I think Toby Green's just got to settle down a little and be more disciplined. For Hawthorn, I think they will be wishing for the fact that the draftees help fuel an ascent up the ladder. And basically what I mean by that, obviously they brought like 4 or 5 young guys in. I think Connor McDonald, Sam Butler, Josh Ward, three players that probably could get a run in the senior side for the Hawks, in favour of some of those like really fringe players, like Daniel Howe, Harry Morrison, those guys. But look, Hawthorn had some really good run late in the season. Won a few games in a row. We're in some other games against some good teams. So obviously they're going to hope that they can translate that over to this season, or this upcoming season. They're very capable. I mean, they've been criticised a little bit. Their midfield's been criticised, but, they were able to find their feet later in the season as these young guys that got a little bit of an opportunity earlier in the year, their first few games in the season, in their careers, basically. Once they got settled, they actually looked fairly decent as a football team. So I think, if that can happen, and they can replicate that late season form, then they will definitely improve on the ladder position, because they were sitting at the bottom or 17th place for quite a while. So yeah, I think that is what the Hawks fans are going to be wishing for this Christmas. For the D's, it's pretty simple, and I'm going to keep this short and sharp. The D's make the grand final. Obviously, they won the grand final, so there isn't, obviously there's a lot of pressure, a lot of expectation now. There's going to be a lot of bandwagons jumping on, to this Melbourne side, basically. Obviously, bloody good football side, and, they're not losing too much. They haven't really lost anyone, to be honest. They've probably gained a little more. Luke Jackson's gotten the exposure. Trent Rivers was really good. Jake Bowie, only played 8 games and won a grand final, So these young kids got exposure on top of winning a grand final. So that is probably the best outcome, because, they've got a very, good young core. It's not really a young core, but they're all in their prime. Petrarca, Oliver, Viney, list goes on. So I think, you can't have too much less expectation, if that makes any sense. I think these fans just going to be wanting a lot, and there's going to be a fair bit of pressure on the football club if they start, even 5-3 in the season, which isn't particularly bad because they can pick it up later in the year. But I think there's going to be a little bit of pressure surmounting if they, lose a couple on the trot. North Melbourne, fans will be hoping that the young midfield core takes a giant leap. And obviously we saw Davies Uniacke, who took a big jump. Jaden Stevenson was good. Larky up forward with Zerha. They were also able to, bring in a couple of role players as well. Eddie Ford was one of those at the very late stages of the season. Ben Cunnington was out for a while, so that really allowed for these North Melbourne players to get some exposure, especially in the midfield. I think Jed Anderson was out for a while as well. So, on all three lines, a lot of kids were getting a go. Tom Powell is another name, fell out of favour in the later stages of the season, but, the signs are there, and if they can make another leap. Will Phillips, I think, is one that really needs to make a jump. He's been in the league for a couple of years, drafted at pick 3, so I think it's going to be key for him. Actually, he's only been in the season 1 year, so I'll let him off a little bit. I'll cut him some slack, but in saying that, he was the 3rd draft pick for a reason. Obviously a bit undersized, but in saying that, I think it's time for him to make that same jump that, Davies Uniacke made as a number 2 draft pick, or number 4 draft pick, I think it was, but you get my point. For Port Adelaide, fans will be hoping that Charlie Dixon will tear the league apart next season. And look, he sometimes went missing, especially against the big clubs, and I think that's what really contributed to Port Adelaide having a less successful record. It wasn't bad by any means. I think they won 15 or 16 games. But in saying that, they could have been better. And obviously you're playing the big teams in September, so you want to be able to perform against these good teams. And it's better to be training yourself throughout the season when you play these teams, when you come up against these teams, to learn, basically. Learn from your mistakes. If you have a good game, it's going to force the opposition to have to scout you even more. And that's going to be a bit of a challenge on your part to adapt and work around it. But I think for the sake of Charlie Dixon, when he switched on, and he's a bloody good football player. So if he can get firing, it's going to be a problem for the league. For Richmond, I think it's going to be pretty simple for them as well. A bit similar to Melbourne. Fans will be hoping that they can have another flag tilt in what I'm going to call a new era, because obviously last season was a bit of a year off for them. A lot of players out injured. Obviously, some players have retired. David Asprey is probably the most notable. Obviously, Rance has gone in the last couple of years. But yeah, I think it's just going to be key that, you know, if they can insert these young players, I think Gibcus is probably going to be the replacement for Asprey. If, you know, they can bring him in, they can bring in a couple of other youthful players, you know, transfer some of the players that got a bit of exposure last season. If they can, you know, take a step up and fit in the best 22 and the Tigers can still go on a flag tilt, go for a run at the flag, challenge Melbourne, then I think, you know, Richmond fans couldn't ask for much more. In saying that, it's going to be really interesting to see how the experienced players come back from what was I guess you could say, a fairly disappointing season given the circumstances. You can obviously cut them some slack given, you know, some of their players were out, but still the dependence on Dustin Martin was pretty noticeable. And they'll obviously be looking for a little bit more balance next year. For St Kilda, Brad Hill becomes consistent, and obviously we saw, I mean, the commentators rant and rave about this and how Brad Hill, when he has like 8 touches a game, it's not good enough. When he has a 30 possession game, they're, you know, going on and on about how they, you know, they said this as if it wasn't blatantly obvious that Brad Hill is good. But yeah, I think St Kilda fans, they know, obviously they gave up a bit for him. You know, obviously was at Fremantle and then they were able to drag him over here. But obviously he has not lived up to the hype. He's had some really good games in there and we've seen his brilliance, but then there's been games where he's just gone missing when the Saints have really needed him, and I think that's contributed slightly to their inconsistencies. So I think it's going to be very key for the Saints and their success that they can find the consistency in Brad Hill's game. Obviously, I don't know where it's going to come from and where the solution is going to come from, what they need to do. But obviously, St Kilda fans are going to be wishing for it. For Sydney, I think Sydney fans are going to be hoping that Isaac Heaney is played in his correct position. We've seen him play forward, we've seen him play in the midfield, and it's very noticeable that he's bloody good in the midfield, but he doesn't get played there enough. Obviously, he is very damaging in terms of scoreboard damage. You know, he will kick a few goals. He's more than capable of kicking a bag of 4 or 5 or even 6. But the problem is he's equally damaging in the midfield, and obviously Josh Kennedy and Luke Parker are on the wrong side of 30, so obviously there needs to be, you know, the next wave of youth to replace them when they end up heading off. So that's probably still a few years away, but I think the more exposure you give to Heaney in the middle, the better. But obviously this is my opinion as well. Some people would say that he's better in the forward line, and I can agree. I would understand why you'd say that, but I think if you play him in the midfield, generally the Swans are much better when he plays there. So I think that is probably the key, or at least what fans will be wishing for at Sydney. For West Coast, I think fans will be hoping that Luke Shuey gets a decent run. Obviously, West Coast were riddled with injuries, and that's why they didn't make the finals. Pretty much coughed it up in the last few weeks of the season. But, you know, Luke Shuey, I think he's played 20 games in the last 2 years, which isn't great. He is your captain. You know, he's on the wrong side of 30. It's a bit of a problem. You know, they lost Tim Kelly. Elliot Yeo was out for a while. Andrew Gaff didn't really, you know, hit his ceiling this season. And obviously, you know, their midfield is like an absolute monster, but the problem was no one was there. So obviously they'll be hoping other players come back too, but I think it's going to be very key that Luke Shuey gets a full run next season, even if it's like 19 games. I think West Coast fans will be wishing for something along those lines. So obviously West Coast fans will be wishing that he gets back and gets a full run at it. And for the Bulldogs, fans will be hoping that Bailey Smith can replicate his final series form for a full season. This guy absolutely tore it apart in the final series, and that's why the Bulldogs made the grand final. I think he kicked something like 8 goals in the first 3 weeks of the finals, which is insane for a midfielder. You know, it's insane in the regular season. To do it in the postseason is absolutely amazing. And that, you know, it wasn't just 3 goals. It was a good possession game as well. Very big moments. I think he kicked one on his left foot from the pocket. You know, seemingly impossible to I think it was a clutch goal. Like, I think it was a last quarter goal. The scores were close. It was big in the context of the game. And if he can replicate that next season, just when you thought the Bulldogs midfield was already unstoppable, it's just gotten even more unstoppable with Bailey Smith taking another leap. So it could be a very big problem for the league if Bailey Smith gets going. Josh Dunkley wasn't quite the same after his injury. Bontempelli, I mean, he's just a beast. Liberatore is tough to stop as well. He's tough in general. And the list goes on. Jack McRae wasn't even included in that list, So that's only their midfield, that we're talking about. But I guess Bulldogs fans are just hoping for that because it's just going to elevate their ceiling immensely if Bailey Smith can do what he did again. But yeah, that's going to be the list. Every AFL team's Christmas wish, I guess you could say, a fan of every AFL team's Christmas wish. I don't know what to call it, but I hope you enjoyed this nonetheless. It's a bit of a unique video. Obviously, off-season content for the AFL is running dry. It's very slow. It's very tough to make. But I hope this video was a good one. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to drop a like, subscribe. Obviously, I was a bit stuttery today, but that's what happens when you talk for about 25 minutes. So anyway, that's going to be it from me. Have a great rest of your day. Have a great Christmas if I don't see you. And I will see you in the next video or stream, whatever that may be. Peace out.